The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending where you are in the world, and welcome to this webinar on improving energy efficiency in sports venues. I am Melina Diamantopoulou, Head of Production and Climate Action. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to welcome so many listeners to this webinar, a testament to the excellent speakers we have participating and sharing their thoughts and experiences in this important topic. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and a link will be emailed to you shortly after the webinar is complete, so you will be able to listen to it again and share it with your peers. Before we start, a few words about climate action. For the last 10 years, we have worked in a unique partnership with the United Nations Environment to develop their official publication and events with the aim to establish partnerships between the public and private sector to accelerate international sustainable development and advance the green economy. Today's webinar takes place ahead of the third Sustainable Innovation in Sport Forum. That's the only high-level European meeting to bring together stakeholders and influencers innovating in the sport sustainability sector. The forum takes place at the Amsterdam Arena on the 2nd and 3rd of May 2018 and brings together more than 250 representatives from sports leagues and clubs, federations, sports venues, broadcasters, the government, UN, private organizations, NGOs, among others, to discuss how the sport industry can inspire and encourage for the fight against climate change. For more information on the speakers of the forum or to register, please visit the website at www.sustainableinnovationinsport.org. Which brings me to today's webinar on improving energy efficiency in sports venues. Improving energy efficiency opens up the opportunity to make sport operations more sustainable and makes perfect business sense. It saves money, enhances corporate reputation, and helps everyone in the fight against climate change. The webinar illustrates best practice on evaluating, setting, and rolling out a strategy, and then measuring and managing the new systems and processes for continuous improvement for a sports venue's energy activity. I feel extremely privileged to welcome two excellent speakers to address this topic, representing both the stadium as well as the technology provider in this space. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Aidan Byrne, Sustainability Manager at Aviva Stadium. Aidan is a sustainability manager at the stadium, and he has spent the last 9 years as part of their technical department. He has been active in the area of energy management since 2011 and is responsible for the implementation and ongoing operation of the ISO 50001 and on energy management and the ISO 20012-1 sustainable events within the stadium. He is a chartered energy manager with the Energy Institute and has published a paper on implementation of the ISO 50001 energy management system in sports stadia. I would also very much like to welcome John Robb, Segment Director of Commercial Buildings EMEA at Eaton. John is responsible for the strategy development and deployment for the commercial building segment for Eaton across the EMEA region. With a significant capability in life safety, energy storage, and power distribution systems, Rob is keen to help business owners and operators understand how they can improve energy security and safety, as well as reducing operating costs. He has extensive experience of electrical and safety products and systems in the buildings area, built from a career spanning more than 30 years. He has worked for a number of leading manufacturers in the industry, but has now been with Eaton for 8 years. Prior to his current role, he was Marketing Director for Eaton's Life Safety product platform. Each speaker will take a few minutes to present their views, following which we will take questions from our listeners. You can submit your questions via Twitter using the hashtag CIS2018 or using the question box on the GoToWebinar bar to the right of your screen. Don't be shy, we will try to get through as many relevant questions as possible in the hour time frame. And with that, I shall hand over to our first speaker, Aidan. Hi, Aidan. We can hear you now.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. As Melina said, my background is in energy management at the Aviva Stadium, and hopefully some of my knowledge and experience can be imparted onto the listeners here today. So I will just try to click onto my first slide. Melina, if you could Hello?
Is that the slide you're looking for?
There might be just a slight delay on my end.
Probably is.
I'm still seeing improving energy efficiency in sports venues. There we go. Okay, so apologies for that minor technical difficulty there. Probably my internet connection. So first of all, today's webinar, it's going to have a quick look at how the Aviva Stadium manages its sustainable operation. And we're going to zero in on the ISO 50001 energy management standard in particular. Then we're going to have a quick look at how to select energy projects, and I'm going to give a couple of examples that we've implemented here in the Aviva over the last few years. And finally, I'll leave a couple of key learnings and advice that I've found over the last number of years. So, how does the Aviva Stadium manage its sustainable operations? So back in 2010, it was very clear to us that we needed to actively manage our environmental, economic and social impacts on the environment around us. And our CEO, Martin Murphy, quickly decided that we should implement the BS 8901 Sustainable Event Management Standard. Now this has ultimately become the ISO 2012-1 Event Sustainability Management Standard following the London 2012 Olympics. Despite having these systems in place, our energy still spiraled out of control after the first year of operation. So that's what brought us onto looking at an energy-specific management standard that went into a little bit more detail. And that has saved us over €1 million in energy costs over the last number of years. So what is the ISO 50001 standard all about? Essentially, it's all about continuously improving energy efficiency and performance through the Plan, Do, Check, Act methodology outlined in the standard. And on the next slide, I'm going to kind of show you how I have interpreted this process in slightly different language. So, okay. The first and probably most important part of any system is to have full and utter commitment from senior management. They need to show the leadership and understanding of policy and the commitment to resources in order to implement such a detailed standard. If you're just trying to push it from the bottom up or from middle management, you're probably going to run into a lot of difficulty. So it's very, very important to get that buy-in early on. The next area, which is not really outlined in the Plan, Do, Check, Act methodology, is the identification phase. And in terms of energy management, really all this is about is identifying all your key sources of energy, you know, gas, electricity, diesel, oil, whatever you might have. And then you need to try and ascertain who or what is consuming the majority of this energy. And the standard refers to these energy users as being the most significant energy users, or SEUs. Following their identification, you're really trying to look at different energy efficiency projects or opportunities for improvement, as they're referred to in the standard, to help reduce your energy consumption. Once all of these key things have been identified, you can then begin to get into the planning phase, where you're starting to establish what objectives you want to achieve, what kind of energy targets you're trying to achieve, project budgets, required resources, and then the definition of an energy action plan. Now, objectives and targets can be set usually at the top level, where senior management will say, okay, we want to achieve a 10% reduction in energy this year, and we will provide the necessary resources. But this can also be from the bottom up, where you can collate all your various energy efficiency projects, and you can establish, okay, if we implement half of these, we can save 100,000 kilowatt hours of energy, or whatever it might be. So that's another way of establishing these targets. The next phase is an energy manager's favorite, where they can get stuck in and actually begin to reduce energy consumption. But I would put one key word of warning here at this stage. There is a tendency to dive straight in and skip all of the other steps to get to the meat and potatoes, as I call it. But this is a key flaw. You really should spend the time in identifying what your SEUs are before you start trying to implement energy projects, because you could be wasting time and resources on systems that aren't having a significant impact on energy. The final phase then is the review phase. And this is where you finally close the loop. You sit down with top management and you review all your energy performance, your achievement to objectives and targets, and also compliance to the standard itself. And this is particularly important if you are trying to achieve third-party certification to whatever standard. So you have to record all your deviations in energy performance and any non-compliances to the standard. And all of these things must be reviewed at planned intervals, usually, every 6 months or at least once a year. So once you've got your buy-in from senior management again, and you're continuing the process of improvement, you can really get stuck into energy projects, which we'll take a kind of a more detailed look at on the next slide. So how do we select energy projects? As I alluded to on the identify phase of the previous slide, first of all, you have to identify your sources of energy, analyze their consumption patterns, usually through meter data or some utility bills. I'm sure most venues will have that data to hand, so that they can establish an energy baseline. This is essentially your starting point. So before I've implemented a particular energy project, this was our consumption level. And then after you've implemented the project, you can come back, review it, and see how you performed. You measure and verify. So this is a really key part. You have to measure and monitor all of your energy users in order to identify the most significant. It's very important that this is done through meter data. It can be kind of guesstimated using plant schedules and equipment ratings, but that's a very difficult road to go down, one I've tried and to be honest, sort of failed. The next part is once you have your SEUs established and identified, you have to figure out what are the external variables or factors out there that will affect the energy performance of these SEUs. And to give kind of an easy example, I suppose, if one of your SEUs is a heating system, your most relevant variable usually is the external temperature, obviously, or heating degree days. So if it gets colder outside and your heating degree day number increases, your energy consumption of your heating system should increase. Once you have those identified, you can then create KPIs or ENPIs, as they're referred to in the standard itself, energy performance indicators, so that you can monitor and measure the performance of these particular SEUs. The next section is really what it's all about, identifying any opportunities to improve efficiency, performance, and reduce consumption. And in a slide in a moment, I will go through a specific process called the energy Venn diagram, which is a structured process of applying a procedure to identify energy projects. And then finally, obviously, select the project, implement it, and then come back and verify it against your baseline once you have completed the project. So on this slide, it's just an example really of an SEU Pareto chart, one I pulled from our 2016 electrical data. And really all it is the consumption data for all of our energy users ranked from left to right, from most significant to least significant. And then using the Pareto 80-20 rule, which generally states that 20% of your energy users consume 80% of your energy. Using that, I suppose, methodology, I've highlighted all the energy users which make up 80% of the stadium's load, and I've identified them in red as being SEUs. So 95% of all my attention, focus, and our resources goes toward energy projects that affect those particular systems. And we kind of, not ignore, but we sort of put to one side all of the other systems, unless there's obvious low-hanging fruit there that you just go ahead and do. As I mentioned, the energy Venn diagram, this is a really, really useful tool, and I'm not too sure how widely known it is. If you're trying to find an energy project against a heating system, you would run through this energy onion, as we sometimes call it, from the center, and then you work your way out. So first of all, you would look at the energy service. So for example, do I need to heat the pitch? Do I need to provide lighting to a particular space? And if the answer to this is no, well, then you know, okay, all the energy going into this service is not required, and you just cut it there and you save a lot of energy. But typically, this won't be the case. Usually, the service is required to some extent, and you're looking for efficiencies further along the process line. And with that, you move on to the next step, which is process. So, okay, we're providing lighting into an event space. Currently, it's artificial light, and you're looking for other opportunities such as, you know, could we get it from more efficient lighting? Could it be natural light, etc. If there's no more efficiencies in the process, you're looking at the various individual component parts of the system, like in a heating system, you know, pumps, motors, fans, and you're just asking questions like, is this piece of equipment sized correctly? Is it too big? Are there more efficient products on the market that could provide the same process? Is there then a better way of controlling this equipment, which is very, very important when it comes to heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and certainly lighting. And we found an awful lot of different projects in the stadium in this control layer of the onion. And then the last two, they're very basic housekeeping opportunities. You know, is there a planned maintenance routine in place? You know, are the correct training procedures put in place? Are your operators qualified to operate the system? Kind of things like that. So it makes obviously more sense to spend time and money early on in the process rather than spending a load of money in the control phase and then 6 months later realizing that, oh, we don't even need this energy service. So that's kind of the logic behind this particular tool. Okay, so on this slide here, I've just outlined a couple of examples that we've implemented over the years. Some are basic, some were a little bit more complicated. So the first one was the post-occupancy valuation of the stadium itself. So to give a little bit of background on that, when we first opened up, we got an awful fright regarding our energy consumption in the first 18 months. We were several times greater than the design estimates that were given to us by the stadium designers. So our task was to find out why were we using 2-3 times more energy than we should be. So essentially we had to do an audit of all our mechanical, electrical and IT systems to see, first of all, were they commissioned correctly? Second of all, are they being operated correctly to the design manuals? In some instances, we had a lack of documentation. In other instances, we found that we weren't operating correctly. You know, we didn't get the proper training. So it was different projects kind of fell out of this initial investigation. And one such project is our building management system. It's a Trend 963 BMS. And we had a deep look at the control strategy set up in the BMS initially. And it was absolutely perfect 25 times a year on match day when everything ran full tilt for 50,000 people. But when we had to run the stadium outside of event day for smaller meetings, conferences and events, we found that certain parts of the system weren't set up or controlled very efficiently. So we had, you know, different pieces of plant and equipment running to try and provide heat to one space, but it was totally unrelated to the space we were trying to control. So it was a lot of housekeeping, and it didn't cost very much. I mean, it was probably 3 or 4 days labor for a software engineer. So overall, it was a very cheap project, but it had an absolutely massive impact on energy. The next project this is kind of a good example of a project that came out of the energy service part of the onion. So, you know, we're an international stadium. We don't have a match every week, so there's often periods of quiet time in between events. And we realized that our general admission areas up on level 1 and level 5 didn't need to be occupied. It didn't need heating, lighting, refrigeration. There was no need to hold stock in fridges and in kiosks for 2-3 months at a time. So we agreed with our catering partners that after every event, they have a week to kind of clean the place down, decentralize their stock, do any stock takes, and then just switch the areas off and put them into basically standby mode for the next event. It's a really simple one, and I'm sure plenty of other venues do the same, but it wasn't so obvious to me in the beginning. It kind of took a year, 18 months to sort of figure that one out. And then finally, it's just another example of a control project, I suppose. Here, essentially, we were trying to shed any thermal consumption or thermal loads on a particular day if we were about to breach our supply point capacity set point, which is like a limit set between us and our gas supplier. And there's some fairly heavy financial penalties if you breach this limit. So all that really is, we knock off our heating before we breach this limit. It's fairly basic, but it's certainly worth looking into. We were spending a lot of money on penalties. So there are just a few examples of energy projects. I hope I haven't kind of run through this a bit too quickly, but I just want to finish up with a couple of key bits of learning and advice that I've gathered from over the years. ISO 50001 is most certainly the best practice for energy management or an energy management system. Now, there are other standards out there that are very good for energy efficient design, and I just didn't have enough time today to include that in my slide, but hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion around it later. One such standard is the IS 399 Energy Efficient Design Irish standard. Next, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. It's really obvious, but unfortunately for us, this was a lesson learned the hard way. When the stadium was handed over to us, all sub-metering had been cut from the project kind of in the latter phases to save costs. This cost us heavily in operational costs, and it was a bit short-sighted. So I would always suggest or recommend that people spend a couple of €1,000 on, electrical, gas, sub-meters, and a proper sub-metering system. It's really, really worth it. It's the best money you can invest for an energy management system. Next, this is a favorite of mine. So a lack of resources and conflicting priorities can be a major challenge. And I suppose here at Viva, we're a fairly light team. There's 25 full-time staff, and a lot of us have kind of multiple roles within the stadium. And for me, being involved in facilities as well as energy management and sustainable event management, sometimes I'm just caught for time. So I'm trying to compete with my various working tasks. So, if you do have the budget to employ a standalone energy manager whose only function is energy management, I would recommend it, but not every business can afford that luxury. So that's an understandable choice. Use consultants, definitely. I highly recommend it, but don't rely on them. When we first were trying to get to grips with energy management and these various standards, it can be a little bit daunting. A lot of these ISO standards are very legalese in nature and hard to understand. So using qualified energy consultants really helped, but you don't want to lean on them too much. You really want to embed that expertise in-house. Otherwise, you're constantly going up and down. It's a roller coaster. Your energy has been managed and it goes out of control, and it's just this continuous cycle. So try to embed the knowledge in-house. And finally, I'm an engineer. I'm not a social scientist. So I find, trying to change people's behavior to be really, really difficult. It feels sometimes like you're chasing the same people around to switch off lights and to, switch off equipment. So where possible, engineer out the problem, especially in lighting systems. Having kind of a personal operator controlling lights is great, but automation and occupational sensors and daylight sensors, they're worth their weight in gold. So try to engineer out as many issues as possible. Okay, that's pretty much my lot. I hope I haven't gone through that too quickly. I look forward to hearing some of your discussion points and questions later on. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Aidan. It's been a very interesting presentation, a lot of real life examples, a true case study. So surely it has been interesting to our audience. We've received already a few questions to our listeners. We will go over your questions at the after John's presentations. A reminder to everybody else, if you want to send us any questions, ideally use the questions box at the bottom right of your screen, which is part of the GoToWebinar software that you're using today. I would now like to welcome John. John, you can hear us and you have control of the mouse, so we look forward to your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Melina, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, as Melina said, wherever you are in the world. So so thank you for the introduction earlier. Just as a recap, my name is John Robb. I'm the Segment Director for Commercial and Industrial Buildings for Eaton across the EMEA region. So thank you to Aidan for that introduction to what's happening in Aviva Stadium in Dublin. Very much outlines a systems approach to energy management, which we as a technology provider would absolutely endorse, and we think that's the basics of making or the basis of making any energy decisions. What I'd like to talk to you about over the next 10 or 15 minutes is some of the specific challenges that we've identified within stadiums and arenas, and how one particular enabling technology, and that's basically in the form of battery energy storage systems, can help use and manage electrical energy within buildings in a far more sustainable and resilient way. And I'm going to do that by illustrating with a live example. We are working now with Amsterdam Arena, who are the hosts of our conference in May, and we'll be installing a battery energy storage system, which we hope will be live in time for the conference. I was actually there last Thursday. The building works are well underway, and we expect to start installing the equipment as of next month. So let me move on. Okay, a little bit of a delay there, Alina. I'm not seeing the okay. So firstly, I'm afraid the obligatory corporate slide. There's only one, and just really to introduce who Eaton are. Many of you may not be familiar with us. We position ourselves as a leading global power management company. Our mission is to help the world use electrical, fluid and mechanical power more reliably, efficiently, safely and sustainably. We operate actually in four main divisions. So in aerospace, electrical, which is part the division that I'm part of, also in hydraulics and in vehicles. You will find Eaton equipment and components and services. We are delighted as Eaton to be sponsors of the Sustainable Innovation in Sport event. We think that this is a really interesting area to be playing in at the moment. Okay, so slides seem a little bit slow, Melina, to advance. Okay, thank you. So what are the energy challenges for stadiums and arenas? And we think out of all of the building types that we work in, stadiums and arenas have the most unusual peak power demands. So during major events, we can see the peak power demand surge as the demand increases for lighting, for TV broadcasting, for catering concessions. And typically in large stadiums, we can see power demands in the region of 5 to 7 times the normal base load. And with it, this brings some real challenges. So firstly, in terms of the actual costs of supplying power, which are normally is a combination of the amount of energy used, but also the capacity that that power is being consumed, so the power rating. And also the complexity of managing that peak and the risks that it brings in terms of excess demand on the local grid can cause stability risks. And that really brings us onto the second challenge, which is around energy resiliency. Power outages in a major stadium or arena without a proper backup system can clearly have direct financial impact, but also indirect reputational impact. Many of you may be familiar, not so long ago, actually in December, there was a UK Premier League football match postponed, or sorry, delayed for over an hour because of a mains power failure that effectively the backup power didn't operate as it should have. We also recognise stadium operators have a need to operate in a more sustainable and green way, whether that's to meet the requirements of a sports governing body like UEFA or the Olympic Operating Committee, for example, or simply to underpin their own sustainability agenda. And then the final challenge I'd like to raise, and this is one a little bit perhaps for the future, is the future demand for electric vehicle charging. And we believe that all operators of public parking infrastructure, and certainly that would cover stadiums and arenas, are going to see an increasing requirement to integrate EV charging. And that brings challenges in terms of how we supply the additional power, but also opportunities in terms of potential extra revenues, but also for those smarter people is to use the effectively extra battery capacity that can bring during peak demand through vehicle to grid services. So effectively the stadium can access charged power within parked vehicles. A little bit more on that later. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so we're already working with quite a number of commercial and industrial building operators in the area of battery energy storage to improve resiliency and sustainability. And this helps them ensure business continuity by ensuring that in the event of a power outage, they can effectively operate independently of the grid, continue their operations, and not experience any of the financial or reputational risks. Secondly, we help them optimize energy bills and operational expenses. And this can be by what we call peak shaving, so effectively using the battery capacity to reduce the peak demand, which has a direct impact on the energy bill that has to be paid. But also in some areas, and Amsterdam Arena is a good example, where there is local renewable generation, and in Amsterdam it's through solar PV, that solar PV resource is optimized and none of the energy is wasted. Thirdly, we're helping our partners generate additional revenues. So whilst the battery storage system is there to provide security and backup during a major event, at other times that resource can be used firstly in simple terms to sell back excess energy to the grid operator, or probably more lucratively is to participate in what we call grid stabilization services, which basically helps support the local grid network and something that local grid operators will pay for. And then finally, as we've already touched on, helping them improve their green credentials. So for the next slide. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the technology and what we're doing at Amsterdam Arena. So we have partnered with Nissan, the motor manufacturer, who are one of the world's largest manufacturers of electric vehicles and also manufacture their own battery packs for electric vehicles. Effectively, the energy storage system that we supply and we're supplying to Amsterdam Arena consists of elements. There is, and if you look at the diagram or the picture on the left, the smaller of the two units is the battery rack, and that houses both new and second life electric vehicle batteries. And that in itself is quite a nice sustainability story, because as electric vehicle batteries hit a certain capacity, as their capacity diminishes over time, they become less useful in a mobile environment for a vehicle, but they still have plenty of life. So we have a partnership with Nissan that allows the batteries to go back to the factory to be fully tested and inspected, repackaged, and then we can sell them back on as part of a static energy storage system at a much lower cost than a new battery. In the case of Amsterdam Arena, we're using a combination of both new and second life batteries. The second element of the system is the larger unit on the left-hand side. Sorry, if we can just go back to that slide. And this is what we call the power inverter. And basically, this is the piece of equipment that converts the power from the battery and puts this back onto the power distribution system of the building. It actually works bi-directionally, so it can take power from the network and use it to charge the batteries, or when needed, take power out of the batteries and put it back onto the network to power the building. And in simple terms, they're the two basic building blocks of a battery energy storage system. So on the next slide. So with Amsterdam Arena, as I said, we're working with Nissan. I'd like to introduce a fourth partner, which is the Mobility House. And the Mobility House are basically the company that will operate or manage the day-to-day operation of the battery system. So firstly, making sure that there is sufficient energy in the batteries to support the arena during a major event like a football match or a concert. But at other times, we'll work with the local network provider, in this case, Alliander, to provide grid stabilization services, or what we call frequency response services. Basically, what this does, it allows the network provider to balance the supply and demand. So sometimes they will be generating more power than is being consumed, and they're looking for somewhere to dump that excess power. In this case, in the batteries at Amsterdam Arena, and at other times they will need to boost their local power and will want to draw back that power out of the batteries. And this is a service that the network provider will pay for and provides a revenue stream. The specific system we're installing in Amsterdam Arena consists of a 4 megawatt hour system, which we'll use 9 of our bi-directional power inverters, 119 battery racks, into which are fitted 1,160 new and second life battery packs. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, please. Okay, now this is where I'm a little, we have a little bit of a challenge here. That this is a short video that we want to show. However, unfortunately the audio isn't coming through on the system, and I can see it's actually running a little bit slowly. I don't know if there's anything we can do, Melina, to buffer that and then start it again from the beginning.
I can start it again, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would help. And then I'm going to make some comments from the script on this.
Okay, I'm starting it now.
Okay, let's go. So Amsterdam Arena is, if you're ready to go.
It's going, there's probably some delay.
Okay, so it's an iconic venue for large-scale events. To ensure a seamless experience, the arena is looking for a sustainable solution for energy needs that would reduce CO2 emissions and generate value. I've already talked about the partners that will be involved in this. So Amsterdam Arena, Eaton, Nissan, and the Mobility House. Effectively, this will provide additional backup power, peak shaving, and grid stabilization services. This is quite difficult actually because it's jumping around pretty quickly. I've already talked about the inverters and the battery system, and how the Mobility House will leverage the energy storage system and perform the frequency regulation by charging or discharging batteries based on grid operator demands. So basically the storage system efficiently stores and distributes energy where it's needed, ensures matches and concerts can continue uninterrupted, powering the neighbourhood when necessary and protecting the grid, whilst at the same time reducing CO2 emissions. So I'm just going to let that run through. This hasn't quite worked as well as we would have hoped. When you get the presentation, we'll actually show you how you can access this video on YouTube. It's only 2 minutes, and I would recommend having a look at this. So let's just finish. It's almost there. As I said, this will start to be installed next month. So if we can go back to the presentation, Melina. Okay. So if you search on YouTube, you'll be able to find that video, and I say this will be coming out to you as a recording and the presentation, but I would recommend that you take a look at the video. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so how do we support? So our storage system, it's, really just recapping, it's designed to improve energy resiliency of the stadium to ensure continuous operation during major events. It actively manages the energy usage to improve sustainability and to reduce energy costs. It allows the stadium to become a good neighbour by boosting local network stability. And also it's going to help support future increased power demands, which we believe will come from EV charging. So next slide. So where to start? And this is where I'll refer back to Aidan's presentation. I absolutely agree. Measurement is everything. So the starting point is to know exactly how much, where, and when energy is used. So a detailed load profile measures to reduce electricity demand through energy efficiency measures. Some examples might be LED light, installing LED lighting, improving thermal insulation, improving ventilation systems. And then we move on to what I'd call more of the active or smart energy management, and that is where possible to consider looking at renewable generation sources like solar PV or wind, and then couple that with battery energy and storage systems to boost resiliency, reduce costs, and generate additional revenues. Okay, so next slide, Melina. So how can we help? Firstly, we can help determining the optimal energy storage package to meet the specific needs. With working with a number of stadium operators, we recognize that each challenge is slightly different. So this is not an off-the-shelf solution. We would work with operators to determine what would be an optimal package. We can then work on the installation of what is proven technology with our wide service capabilities. Energy storage has to be integrated into the existing power structure of the building, and we have the knowledge and expertise to do that. And then thirdly is helping reduce the energy risk as the energy picture continues to unravel. So basically this is ensuring future proofing in the years to come. So any of you that will be attending the conference on the 2nd and 3rd of May, we will be there. We will have a small booth. We'd be delighted if you come and talk to us in a little bit more detail about how we can help you with actively improving energy and management and sustainability in your stadium. So I think that's the last of my slides. So I'm guessing, Melina, we now move on to the questions.
Exactly. Thanks very, very much, Rob, and thanks for your patience. We managed to do the video eventually, but as you said, the listeners of the webinar, they will receive a recording, and they will be able to also themselves go on YouTube and watch the video and actually listen to the sound of it as well. I am now unmuting Aidan as well, and as we've discussed, let's move on to the questions and answers part of the webinar for a few minutes just before we wrap up. We've had a few interesting questions actually. One is a very common theme you would find not just in sustainability or in sports, but literally in any corporate environment. So we've received a question that I would like both of the speakers to maybe comment on. But one of our listeners is asking, are there any tips on how to convince the top management on what must be done? Is it the stressing the possibility to save money? The best argument if you want to use for top management. How do you make sure that they get the importance of moving to an energy efficiency project? Aidan, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want to go first?
Yes, certainly. I think, Melina, you almost hit the nail on the head straight away. There are, very forward-thinking managers and CEOs out there, but I think a lot of it comes down to cost. As much as a lot of people would like to claim that the environment is to the core of their main energy objectives, a lot of time it is about reducing costs. So if you can just show to someone, look, we're consuming over €1 million in energy, by implementing certain energy practices, we can save you 10% or 20% on that. I think money talks, and I think that's probably the most important part. It's unfortunate we haven't moved a little bit further along in the last number of years, but I think it still does come down to cost.
Brilliant. John, you Eaton, and as part of your role with Eaton, you speak to a lot of different industries, obviously not just sports. What is your take on that question?
And I would agree 100% with Aidan. Cost is a key consideration, but I put it more in terms of what the return on investment is. So if I look at the specific solution I've been talking about, our starting point is the question to be asked is, will my building operate without this system? And the answer is yes, of course it will. It's not an essential to operate the building. So therefore, there has to be a compelling business case. And this is what we do with our clients, whether they're in the sports industry or any other industry. What we find is the business case or the return on investment normally results out of the stacked benefits of a number of the wins. So that can be reducing your energy bill, it can be optimizing consumption, it can be generating additional revenue streams. In the case of a sports stadium, it could be what's the financial benefit of gaining, becoming a UEFA approved stadium, as an example. So ultimately, what we'd encourage clients to do is consider, can they put a monetary value on each of the benefits, and then stack up those benefits to see if there is a business case to support the investment.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. To the listener who asked the question, and I guess many more listeners will have questions like that in terms of getting internal buy-in. I'm sure John will be, or Aidan will be able to have an offline conversation with you, and I'm happy to connect you with them. John, I actually have a couple of technical questions from the audience regarding the batteries. I'll throw them out, and maybe you can briefly answer them. But again, it might be something that you would have to take on offline the webinar. So one of
I'll do my best.
So one of the listeners is asking if the battery storage facilities will demand air conditioning and to optimize the battery life. And we also have a question in terms of are there any heat harnessing solutions around for the heat produced from the battery storage facility? So I think there's a lot of questions around the technicalities of how that installation works and how it's managed.
Okay, so I don't want to get too technical on this, and certainly, you know, if we want to dive this a little bit deeper, I would bring in some of my technical experts. But effectively, yes, there are some thermal considerations, but they are not significant. The batteries will operate in a wide range of climatic conditions. In terms of thermal harnessing, that's something I would probably need to take some guidance off some of my technical experts on. Certainly in the case of Amsterdam Arena, we are having to provide within the room that they are building for the storage, where there will have to be some airflow requirements on there, but I'm not aware of any requirement to recapture waste heat, because effectively it's not that significant. Simply, if you put the batteries and the inverters in a very enclosed space, yes, you may need to think about providing some cooling, but it's not to such a degree where it would probably be cost effective to try and recover that heat.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that answers the question, but if the person asking the question, if you want to hook them up with me, I can get a more detailed answer for them.
Sure. That's easy to do. I have another slightly technical question. I don't know, Aidan might be able to help with this, but one of the listeners is asking, because you refer to kind of how you manage the refrigeration systems in the stadium. He's asking if you, or if you're aware if anybody else in stadiums are doing any periodic cleanings of the condenser coils of the several thousands of refrigerations and freezers in the stadium. He mentions, I don't have the name of the listeners, but he mentions that in their example, their project, they are doing this, and they've seen significant cost savings from this project.
Okay, it's actually a very interesting area. Now, I can't speak for the wider industry, but we don't proactively clean the condensing coils, but we do inspect the condition of the coils. And only as of last week, we found a number of them that had kind of frozen over a bit, obviously causing a multitude of issues with the refrigeration equipment. So from both a maintenance aspect, I think it's an excellent idea. And I think I'd be interested to see the energy cost savings on that, and might even be something we would implement here in the stadium. But we don't actively clean them, but yes, we do inspect them all.
Okay, brilliant. So to the listener, if you want to get back in touch with me, I can connect you with Aidan directly if you would like. Another question for you, Aidan, and I'm sure John will probably have some input in this, but you briefly referred to behavioral change and, you know, controlling people, and we talked about, you know, convincing the board and top management. You talked about changing people's behavior, staff's behavior. You know, you said you're chasing people to turn off the lights and things like that. And this is people are always an ongoing you know, challenge and opportunity at the same time, I guess. But do you have any programs in place? How are you driving engagement in the stadium employees to change their behavior and attitude?
Yeah, it's a very interesting area and topic. It's certainly not impossible. I suppose I'm an engineer by trade, and I'd like to find a technical solution to problems where possible. And when you introduce people, real life people, into the process, that can be very difficult. I suppose here in the stadium we do a lot of awareness campaigns, around sustainable operational practices and energy management. Every couple of months I'll host a bit of a kind of a gig here in the stadium, a bit of a presentation, and it could be a couple of prizes and different things like that. And you do find over time, people do slowly start to come along with the idea. Now, one challenge is the word sustainable and sustainability. I found myself. Other people who aren't aware of it, they often think it's a bit fluffy and a bit airy-fairy, and they don't fully understand it. So I spend a lot of my time communicating what it really means in real terms to people. And a lot of the time, people they really understand it when you talk about business continuity. Retention of jobs. If we can reduce the cost of running the stadium, it takes the pressure off the board of directors. It's potentially saving people's jobs. When you talk about energy, you can easily relate it to at home. So I always try to draw parallels between energy management at home, and that's pretty much the same thing. It's just a different scale, and the complexity gets a bit greater when you talk about a commercial building. So when you say to people, like, you wouldn't leave the lights on in your house, so why would you do it when you come into work? Or you wouldn't leave the heating on. It's things like that that kind of resonate with people, and you try to bring it down to kind of a more almost domestic level. People can relate to it a bit more, but it is possible. But sometimes, and there's a couple of people out there, I'll name no names, it's like it is sometimes like banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they're ignoring me on purpose for the funner, but look, it's all part of the process. It's all very interesting. And
Absolutely. John, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Just, and maybe it's a little bit off topic, but I've touched on the area of electric vehicle charging, and I think this is going to be a massively interesting area to see how behavioural aspects play out. That, driving petrol or diesel vehicles, we're quite used to. When we need to turn up at the fuel station, top up, and then we go back again when we need to. Electric vehicles are going to be quite different, and particularly if we want to engage users of electrical vehicles in what we call vehicle to grid services. So you park your vehicle, you plug it in, and for a period of time, the host may be taking power out of your battery. And psychologically, that's going to be quite challenging for a lot of people. It's how are we going to overcome those behaviors? Because if we actually look at the amount of time vehicles are parked to the amount they're being driven, there's a huge amount of time where vehicles can be parked and plugged in. And in the future, when EV is the norm, that can be a huge capacity boost to the national network. So how do we encourage people to participate in that? And I think we have a view that, like most children, we can all be bribed. So if the incentive is good enough, then people will consider participating. And for sports stadiums, there may be, the simple ones would be reduced parking rates, but also could be incentives on discounted tickets, that sort of thing, to encourage people to be willing to park up and participate in vehicle to grid services. I say one for the future, but behaviour will be quite key in this.
Okay, very, very interesting, John. Thank you. I think we have a couple of more minutes. Let's try to do another 2 or 3 questions maximum. Aidan, very, very specifically, and if you would like to, briefly, because you talked about ISO 50001, but we didn't have time to expand on it during your presentation. You've done a paper on that as well. Can you very briefly talk us through how can this be applied to sports facilities and the sector specifically?
yeah, absolutely. I suppose the real benefit in most ISO standards, they're typically designed to be vague enough to work in a number of business settings, and different scales. Like, essentially, a stadium is very, very similar to a hotel, with the exception that there's a big lump of grass in the middle. So there's a lot of similarities across different business units around the world. All ISO 50001 is a structured management system to reduce energy, and it's very good even for seasoned energy managers who haven't used it before. People have a tendency to do the tasks and the jobs that they like and enjoy, and ignore the ones that kind of annoy them and bother them. And the same is true for myself. So when you have to go through a standardized approach, you make sure that you're doing all the relevant prep work, you're recording all the relevant documentation, even if you don't like it. And the benefit of having a certification body then auditing your system, it kind of keeps you honest, and it makes sure that you're doing all the things that you said you were going to do. So that's the real benefit to applying an international standard like ISO 50001 to any venue, a stadium or not. I think the benefits are, there.
Okay, okay. I've got a very, very interesting question that just came in, Aidan, so I'm trying to squeeze that in. But somebody's asking, and I'm not sure if John has thoughts on that, but somebody's asking, what would you say is the most cost effective? Changing people's culture to turn off the lights, or installing a system of or a sensor of some sort that does that automatically?
Wow.
Yeah.
After you, Aidan.
Well, yeah, I suppose I don't know whether it's cheaper, but it's certainly easier.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier to spend a few euros and to install a sensor than it is to change someone's mind or behavior. You know, bad habits are hard to break. Same for myself. So I don't know how you feel about that one, John. I'm sure the technology approach is probably the easier of the two.
No, and I absolutely agree. And my evidence to that would be walk around any city centre at night time and look at all of the unoccupied buildings with all the lights blazing away. We've still got a long, long way to go in terms of modifying behaviour. So where you can put cost-effective solutions in, I think that's always is probably always going to give you the best return.
Yeah,
Okay.
and to build on what John said earlier, you know, the carrot and the stick are the only thing that will drive behavioural change. So financial incentives are key. Even our own Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, the SAI, you know, there are still different grant systems out there to try and promote energy efficient design, and you know, the uptake it has been good on that, but it could certainly be better, even when there's money on the table. So you know, I don't know why people aren't kind of chomping at the bit, you know.
Okay. Last question. I guess, and you know, the reason why I would like to ask this question is because we've spent the last hour talking about sustainability and looking specifically at energy
Yeah.
operations within the stadium and within the sports sector, but obviously when we talk about sustainability we should keep in mind that this is a much broader thing, and energy is a part of a long process for environmental, social, economic sustainability effort. And I guess this question is because I know very well what, you know, John talked about the Amsterdam Arena and how they're operating, and I know they have some very interesting projects that I would like John to talk about. But I think the question is, what is the role of a stadium of sports above and beyond events? How can they be part of a broader thing? How can they further support the sustainable development goals? John, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. And I think this reflects back with our experience with Amsterdam Arena. So not only are we supplying them a battery energy storage system, as I've described, we've actually become a strategic partner of an organisation called Amsterdam Innovation Arena. And this is a wide grouping of companies that are all looking at improving sustainability and the fan experience within stadiums. And there's companies in there like Microsoft, Philips Lighting, Honeywell, BAM, the construction company. And we are working together and collectively on defining and piloting new innovation projects that, you know, some of this is around sustainability, some of it is about improving the fan experience. This could include things like mobility, it could include things like improving the local communications network. So Amsterdam Arena are taking quite a leading role in this. And I know Amsterdam City are looking at the arena effectively to become a hub for the regeneration of that southeast area of Amsterdam, which is perhaps one of the more underdeveloped areas. So my argument or my view is, as we have these fabulous stadiums, investments in the infrastructure there, they need to be leveraged more than to be just a venue for a sports event or an entertainment event. How can they be used to boost the local economy? How can they be used to pilot new ideas, whether they are improving sustainability? And I think this is something that Amsterdam Arena are very passionate about. And again, those of you that are coming over to Amsterdam in May will certainly learn a lot more about Amsterdam's visions for the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. Aidan, would you like to comment on that before we close?
Yeah, for sure. I'll just briefly comment. I suppose because of the role and influence that sporting teams and stadia have kind of within our culture, it's so high profile, and people from kids right through to elderly people, we're all involved in sports in one way or the other. So I think there's kind of a responsibility there that we're showing, that we're trying to lead the way in promoting a sustainable future. We would be remiss if we didn't take the opportunity to promote the message out to the wider public, at our events or through our various advertisements, in the news and social media. So I think there's kind of an onus there on us to, lead the way.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. And with that, we shall close the webinar for today. I want to thank very, very much both Aidan and John for taking time to put together the presentations, have all the calls we had before the webinar took place, and dedicating more than an hour of their time today to answer all of our questions. As a reminder, the Sustainable Innovation in Sport Forum will be taking place in the 2nd and 3rd of May in Amsterdam Arena. Everybody is welcome to attend. Eton as well as Aviva Stadium will be speaking at the event, so they'll be there to meet with you and answer any more of your questions. The webinar recording will be emailed to you in the next couple of days, so please do give us some time to get this together, and we will definitely send you the recording so you can listen to it again and share it with your peers. Thank you everybody very much, and I hope to see you in Amsterdam in a couple of months from now.